opportunity to be here, and that's for IIT Online as well. We'll go live in 5 minutes.
Ryan, yes. Pleasure to meet you, Mindy.
You're an alum as well?
Architecture.
You get to ride in Squire after.
Is that a good field to be in these days?
It is. I enjoy it. No regrets so far.
That's good. Good.
Yeah, but
Actually, how did you find out about this? Like,
I'm driving.
I know Joey.
oh,
Yeah, so he invited me to be a part of it. He actually has me and my partner thinking it would be really interesting to have a couple on the panel, but she's
So you have to
in
drive
far
the
more
truck.
demand than I. She had other things happening today.
that is fair.
I heard about this
Both
from
the actual projects and the
alumni
lot.
board member.
So making one of the.
I guess we have that discussion and we're looking for.
So I guess it was a one-off, so we didn't have to drive 2 hours every
How about you?
Chanel told me about it a while ago at the alumni dinner thing, and
Oh, all right.
so then they asked me. I was like, I'll be over to that. Sure, why not?
Cool.
I didn't have any experience then. I don't have any now, but
Life is the
Life
experience.
is exactly.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. The process of, identifying self and knowing self and making that your public expression, I think is, it's a big freaking deal.
Yeah.
That's not something that I think
Ever
should be
evolving.
dismissed, as experience and value and,
that's true. Yeah, I know. Just self-deprecating.
that's right, yeah.
Hello. We're going to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today. Thank you. Can we turn up the volume on the microphone? Can you guys hear me now? Okay. So we're going to get started by introducing our moderator today. So Brian Ippolito is one of the reasons we're all here today. He's the chair of the Alumni Board's Career and Professional Development Committee, and he wanted to have this very important conversation just at the political climate and just different things that are going on here at the university. We felt this was an important conversation to have. But Brian is a graduate of the university, aerospace 1992. He is an alumni board member. We just had our meeting today, so hello to the other board members that are here. And Brian is the president of Orbis Technologies Incorporated in Washington, D.C., and he will take over from here.
Thank you, Chanel, and thanks to IIT for hosting the event. We have a great panel today. This really came out of a discussion last year with the administration saying, we had a women's panel, and the provost turned and said, that was a great panel, but I really want to push the envelope in discussions, and I want to bring, more leading edge topics. And so we put this panel together. We have wonderful panelists, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about themselves. And so we'll walk through, the way the format's going to work is we'll walk through some questions, or we'll walk through questions that I will ask them that have come in, and then we'll open it up to the floor. So feel free to ask away. We have, when you hear the introductions by them, each panel member, you'll realize we really cover a broad range, and we have some experts here who will share their thoughts with you. So Paola, let's start with you, and why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, thank you for coming and watching. My name is Paola Arce. I am an IIT alumni I graduated with my architecture degree in 2014. I'm currently the permitting manager for a telecommunications engineering firm. I was born in Mexico and and moved to Green Bay, ended up here in Chicago. So that's a little bit on my background.
All right. We good? Good afternoon, y'all. I'm Anthony Christ. I'm a visiting professor at Chicago Kent, so right up the road. I come from Georgia. For the last few years, I've done a lot of LGBT rights work. Began when I was in law school, helped draft the New York Marriage Equality Act and worked on about 8 other marriage equality laws. Helped draft I drafted the new Illinois gay and trans panic defense ban, which is, I'm proud to say, it's the first piece of LGBT civil rights legislation in the country to pass unanimously and be signed by the governor. So we're doing good things in Illinois. So I've done quite a bit of work on marriage, LGBT civil rights more broadly. I teach employment discrimination and been involved in litigation involving LGBT employment discrimination across the country. Right now, been working on a case in New York, and been involved with issues in Illinois as well. And so I'm glad to be here. Glad to have been invited, and look forward to the panel discussion.
Hey, my name is Ryan Gann. I graduated with Paola with a degree in architecture in 2014. I'm a designer at Ross Barney Architects. A little bit about us at Ross Barney Architects. We are a woman-owned business, so I think a lot of my perspective of inclusiveness and opportunity comes from that. And a lot of our work is focused on communities and public space, civic space, equity, and focusing on access to quality design. So I think as we go through the panel today, a lot of my background and experiences will be reflected in that.
Hi there. My name is Mindy Reedon. I currently serve on the staff of the Maria Kaupas Center. It's a small Catholic after-school program located in Marquette Park. I am originally from Shiacton, Wisconsin, a population 805. It's a booming metropolis, and went to Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin. I came out as a sophomore, and I just realized sitting here that was 20 years ago that I was a sophomore in college, and so I've been out for 20 years, which is kind of hard to believe. But for my employment, I've always been involved in faith-based organizations, all within the not-for-profit sector or directly with Catholic parishes in Wisconsin. And so that's the perspective that I am bringing here today.
All right. My name is Kylie Bruden. I am a recent graduate from IIT back in August. I have been searching for a job for the past couple months, and I finally got an offer now. So I'm just a... Thanks. Yeah, I've been out as a trans woman for about like 3 or 4 months now. So I'm coming at this from that perspective. Very, very new to everything.
All right. Well, I will tell you, the panel's a little bit modest because they really have done, even for those that just graduated, some pretty impressive professional accomplishments. And so I want to start with challenges and roadblocks in the workplace. And Paula, I started with you, so I'll start with you again and ask Ryan as well. But can you share with us, just from your perspective and your experience, what you think the challenges have been for you in the workplace?
Thank you. So I guess what I want to start by saying is the challenges for a new graduate, we all have that one big step. We're new graduates. We all think we know it all. We want to be the best that we can be, and we want to get ahead as quickly as possible, right? Which are challenges on their own because we need to learn. We haven't been out in the work field as other people have. So with that said, you have to add the aspect of the concerns of being out. To me, it wasn't as big of a challenge. I think the biggest challenge was I look like this, I'm a woman, and I'm gonna need to go to the bathroom at some point. And I work in a very small firm, so mainly males in the office. And I'll tell you a really quick story. I got up, it had been about 6 months since I've been in the company, went to the bathroom, no problem. Somebody new had started in the company, and made a comment to another coworker saying like, why is this guy going to the girls' bathroom, right? So my coworker is like, that it's a girl, that's Paola. Like she was new, she didn't know, but those are the type of challenges that some of us encounter. Whether you identify, you are male and identify as male, or if you are non-binary, or, if you just don't want to have to deal with, different things in that aspect. So those are some of the challenges. How do you stay truly yourself and safe in the workplace when you have this other set of people that might not ever have encountered somebody like you? But at the end of the day, you go to work and you have to do your job. So that's kind of my experience of some of those things that people don't think about. Eventually, it comes out, more states are trying to do things. The New York banned on bathrooms and things like that. So it's things that more people are trying to staying aware of, but still a challenge to all of us as we move on from employer to employer. I'm currently looking for a new job or new opportunities, right? So what happens then? I move on to a new company and all those set of challenges will begin again.
Okay.
That's a pretty good segue because I think, from the perspective that I come with here today, working for a woman practitioner, a female practitioner that has, a very successful company that is in a profession that has been predominantly old white male driven for a significant period of time. She worked against a lot of those obstacles and has brought that sort of idea of inclusiveness for both ethnicity, background, perspective, political beliefs. That sort of is the culture that's at our office. So I've had the fortune to be part of that. But then there is sort of the other side of it, of the perspective of who I am and having never really been too ashamed of being able to go into work and present myself in the way that I present myself around my friends. And I think that is sort of a confidence building aspect that takes some time. It takes growth. It takes experiences that I've sort of shoved back to the back of my head that I might have been little and insignificant then, had sort of been blown out of proportion at the time, and then sort of taking those and all letting them sort of trickle down into an essence of me being able to have a perspective about presentation. So there is sort of the safety of a workplace, but then there's also working with the diversity of clientele that we have, whether they're public agencies, people that are working, in city government, that they have their own sort of perspective, that they have their sort of piece of the puzzle of creating architecture and built space that they control and they feel a dominance over. And whether you're a female, a male, or someone that identifies as something else, they're going to bring a chip on their shoulder about that sort of visual presentation of yourself as well. So that's something that I've started to encounter more recently, kind of being in those places of project management, presentation, representing our firm in other aspects. And another side of this too, as much as architecture might have been a male-dominated industry for a while, it is still an art and design industry, and typically art and design industries sort of have this flexibility and this openness. And so there's something to be learned from that idea of creativity in work that then becomes sort of an expression of yourself as a person in the workplace.
So both of you have brought up points I think are very interesting, but one of the things I pull from it is that this confidence of yourself and being comfortable with who you are, which is a trait that we want to see every candidate coming through the door. And so since, I guess, Kylie, we'll start with you, as someone who's just gone through this, so you hear these seasoned professionals, you hear what they have, so now you've gone through the interview process, so why don't you talk a little bit about how you prepare for an interview, and so maybe we can kind of better understand, what was good, what you thought was good, what you thought was bad. You're quite an accomplished computer science major, 4.0. It's the hottest market on the planet. So talk to us about your experience and what you thought you did well and what you would kind of do over.
All right. So I, let's see, preparing for an interview, I mostly looked online at tips for how to prepare for interviews. So a lot of that involved compiling lists of questions of figuring out what I wanted to know about the companies I was working for. Being out and just being myself is pretty important to me, so I definitely wanted to work for a company that would be okay with that. I didn't really have a great system for figuring that out. Mostly I would in an interview during the in-person interviews or the over the phone interviews, I might try to I guess one way that I found coming out during an interview that was successful was I just brought up my identity in relation to something else. I was the commencement speaker for the IIT graduation ceremony last May, and I came out during that speech. So every time people asked about that in interviews, I would bring up that I had come out as a trans woman during that. So that seemed to work as a way to test the waters. It really does not everybody wants to come out during interviews, though. It's also not a great decision if you really need the job and you don't want that to impact your chances of getting it, because it definitely can impact it. We've talked about that a little bit amongst ourselves. If the job is really important and you don't you can sacrifice being out in the workplace, then that might be a thing that you should consider. Yeah, basically preparing for an interview, I prepared questions, I prepared how I wanted to approach, how I wanted to come out to people, and that is all I have to say right now.
So part of this is looking at the environment that you're going, the employer, looking for their culture, looking for their environment, making sure you can be comfortable with yourself, which leads us to Mindy. So you work for a Catholic faith-based group, right? Is that correct?
I do.
Yeah. So why don't you share with us your perspective on kind of the interviewing process? Because it kind of shocked me when you told me that.
Well, it's interesting. So I feel like within the queer community broadly, there are people that there are stereotypes certainly within that context, and for me, I've not always had the luxury of being able to come out. That was just kind of assigned to me. And so I feel like that's been a part of it. But with my own interviewing, I never had the opportunity to come out in an interview. I never had the desire to come out in an interview because I couldn't. I certainly would not have had any of the jobs I've had in the past had I come out in the interview. But as I think that's a question that as I might look for my next job, I might consider differently. How important is it for me to have my personal values and way of being in the world align with my professional experience? And I think that can vary. It depends on the mission of an organization. It depends on the culture within an organization. And it depends on your boundaries, too. Establishing your own personal boundaries around employment. How much of my personal life do I want to bring there? So that understanding of myself and my own relationship with employment has shifted. And now I'm at the point where if my job is at risk, then that's not a job I want. And my current employer has a non-discrimination policy. Within the Catholic Church, there are religious exemptions, which is a really unfortunate thing. But that does allow faith-based institutions to have a religious exemption and fire employees who are considered ministers. And so if you are in a position where you are representing the faith in a particular way, you need to live that accordingly. And so luckily I'm not in that position right now.
So just a quick panel vote. Coming out, you brought out coming out in an interview, yes or no? What's the vote, each of you? Your vote was you did not have the opportunity. So
not always, right,
so,
based on appearance.
Okay, so
it's
would you do it
certain.
in an interview, yes or no?
No.
Okay.
My answer would be it depends on like what I'm interviewing for and if it's important or not, contextual based.
Yeah, depends doesn't help audience.
Overall, I'd say yes.
Okay. Ryan?
I would say yes.
If you Google me for 1 second, you'd figure it out. So.
I think, like Minda said, I don't really have a choice unless you mislabel me, which tends to happen all the time. But I don't think it's necessary. I think it's a job. You're going to do a job. It isn't about 100% about who you are after the job is done. So no.
So a lot of this comes into when we talk about interview questions. So let's.
Changing her answer.
She changed her answer. Okay.
Maybe. I don't know that I'm solidly on one side of the fence for that.
So let's talk about what the companies. Let's talk about the laws for a second, because when we put the panel together, the feedback, really a lot of question comes back to law, which is why we're really happy to have Anthony here. So share with us. Let's start with the interview. You know what the employers can ask you, and what you do if you're asked something that you shouldn't have been asked. Right. So let's start there on the legal questions.
Okay, and I see I have some of my own students in the crowd, so pay attention. So, first of all, employers cannot ask you, are you gay? Are you married? Are you pregnant? All these, questions about your identity and who you are for the most part. There's exceptions, which I'm happy to get into in a second. But they can't blatantly ask you these things. And generally speaking, they're smart enough not to. But what they will do is say, are you bringing, do you have are you bringing someone with you? Or, I got asked a question, not for my current job, because they did a great job. And I'm still here for now. But that someone asked me, do you think you'd fit in? And I was like, I know what you're trying to say to me. But it's a veiled question, right? People are generally better off, or too smart to just come out and tell you what they're really trying to get at. So, I think, of course, you can always massage, your answers in a way that is thoughtful. I don't know, if, saying, oh, that's an illegal question is really your best interview strategy, right? But certainly that's always something to document should it happen. But just to talk about the laws more broadly, so every state is different, and even federal law right now is inconsistent. So let's start with federal law. So first of all, if you work for an employer who has less than 15 employees, you're not covered by federal law. And unless you live and work right currently, Illinois, Indiana, or Wisconsin, federal law won't protect you because only the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the court in downtown Chicago, has ruled that sexual orientation discrimination is a form of sex-based discrimination, which is prohibited under Title VII, which is the federal employment anti-discrimination law. So if you are in, Ohio and you get fired, you're not covered currently under Title VII. So, hopefully the Supreme Court will clean that up. I don't know if they will in the near future. You can talk to some of my students about that issue because it's on their assignment, which is due on Monday. But, in every state's different. So Illinois has sexual orientation discrimination expressly prohibited under state law. Also, gender identity discrimination is expressly prohibited under state law. But there's only, if you work for someone who doesn't have 15 employees, not covered. You go to Wisconsin and you work for a smaller employer, you're covered for sexual orientation, but not gender identity. You go to Indiana, you get nothing. Iowa's 8 employees. So every state is different in terms of who's protected, what kind of employers are covered under anti-discrimination law. Some cities have different anti-discrimination laws. So you go to Indiana, you have some protections in, say, Bloomington or Indianapolis, but you can't sue your employer. You have to go to a board and they'll fine them like $1,000, which is like pittance for most of these bigger companies. So if you're in Illinois, you're pretty well covered for the most part, unless you're working for a small employer. But you have to be mindful of what jurisdiction you're in and what kind of employer you have, and and if you're in a religious institution, there's a good chance you aren't covered by anybody because the First Amendment provides the ministerial exception, and the courts have read that fairly broadly. So you have to be mindful of all those things when you actually decide to accept a job. But yeah, so be mindful of who you're working for and where you're going to work.
So I think it's hard, especially when having a few technical degrees. I will say, working with technical people, sometimes they don't take criticism well. Sometimes they don't like to be critiqued, or they have very strong opinions about their work and the work product. So we always try as employers to make sure that the employee doesn't feel like they're being discriminated against. But when you throw in the answer to the question of how complicated it is, what do you do if you do feel that this is no longer about your work? This is entirely personal, right? You feel that you have been discriminated against. What is your best plan of action? Because it's hard for the non-law students to know what the laws are in all the different states. So what's your advice to them?
Document, document, document. Write everything down with details and dates, and tell trusted people who can be witnesses to say, yeah, he's not making that up. That they told me contemporaneously when it happened. That's always important. If it's a fairly good work environment and you feel comfortable asking for better policies, ask for better policies. Try to make a more proactive effort out of it. If you are in Illinois, you are protected if you complain to the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. You are protected from retaliation if you resist discrimination or you complain about discrimination. So don't be fearful of that. So I think that's documenting and being proactive are certainly good things to do. I think the biggest concern that I have is that people are afraid that they'll be retaliated against, and the law protects you in that instance as well.
So let's kind of move forward in the discussion a little bit to talk about, assuming you're comfortable with your employer, you're comfortable with your environment you're in, what can you do, and maybe you're not comfortable, but what can you do early in your career? I guess, Paula, we'll start with you. It's like, how can you establish yourself professionally, right? And so what advice would you give?
I feel like the legal questions were the easy ones.
You'll ask them on Monday how they feel about that.
I'll grade the papers. You work hard, right? Period. Whether you're of any kind of minority, you're here, you're there, you're in a position where you are in a liberal, more liberal field or not. At the end of the day, it comes down to how much you want to further your career. You are honest with yourself and with your employer. These are my abilities to do this work. Again, you set it up as you're comfortable with your employer, you're happy where you're at, what can you do? If really truly is that rainbows and sunshine kind of employer that loves you or loves to have a diverse group of people working for them, they're going to see your efforts. If you aren't in that situation, it takes you more to get to that place that you want to be. But I think, as women and minorities, I'm a Hispanic woman who happens to be gay, right? So I get extra pushed down, but I'm a permanent manager. I've only been with the company for 3 years. The department that I'm managing, I basically created. The department did not exist before I started working at the company. Now I'm somebody that the CEO trusts and comes to, along with the rest of the managers that they've put in place, but that's because I worked hard and I wanted to see this company succeed. So at the end of the day, it's hard work and honesty about what you can achieve within the company as well. Maybe the company, what you want to do is you're no longer with the right company anymore. So honesty about your ability and how you're going to get how you're going to get or where you're going to get what you want out of your career. It's important.
So I think, Mindy, I'm going to paraphrase you, I may not get it perfect, but your comment about if this employer doesn't basically respect me for the work that I'm doing and judge me on my work, it's not a place I want to be. So that's sound advice. I love it. But the data, when we were preparing for this and talking, Anthony had a different perspective, because there's clearly not everybody's following Mindy's life advice here, because there is a huge disparity in pay, right? Mm-hmm. So Anthony, I don't want to mess it up, so why don't you tell us the facts that you see?
Yeah, so women get paid much less, right? I think as of yesterday, the average American woman is now working for free for the rest of the year. That pay discrepancies are real, and they're even amplified, among LGBT persons and particularly LGBT women. So those are important things to be cognizant of. You can work very hard and still suffer discrimination. One of the cases that I teach all my students, it's about, long story short, it's this woman, her name is Ann Hopkins. She was really successful working for this big firm. And they said, you've brought in all these multi-million-dollar contracts and you've been doing everything you want to do, but you're too aggressive and you're too much of a bully, and you strong-arm people, things that men would otherwise probably get credit for, right? And she was denied a partnership because she was perceived as being a little too rough on the edges. But again, I think a man in her position, succeeding in her job as she did, would have been praised for that conduct, right? But then she was discriminated against when it came time to get a partnership, to be elevated in the company. So I think that story illustrates, at least for me, that you can be a hard worker and you can be dedicated to your job and you can be incredibly successful at it by any objective metric. But discrimination doesn't make sense. Discrimination isn't logical. Discrimination doesn't follow objective metrics. And so while I think everyone should work hard and try to be as successful as they can, you have to be understanding that that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work out for you perfectly in the end. And if it doesn't, you shouldn't be afraid to take recourse and avail yourself of the legal remedies that are there for you.
So if I make a leap of faith and say that part of that reduction in pay is we're grounded in stereotypes, right? And so you're being judged unfairly because of some stereotype. So let me move to Ryan. So tell me, from your perspective and your professional experience, how do you break down those stereotypes? It sounds like you're in a good environment, but there still has to be some out there. So what's your advice on breaking down those stereotypes as an employee?
I mean, I think one of the, so sort of pick up on some of the previous conversation too, there's a difference, or at least a nuance, I would say, between hard work and value. And that's sort of something that I've at least perpetuated in my career, that beyond just working hard, putting in long hours, sort of the metrics that equate to success, potentially, although that's a little ambiguous, that there's some sort of value that you're giving back. And so in terms of looking at breaking down stereotypes, I think it's sort of leading by example. So we've talked about it previously already, there's this idea of adding new policies. Policies don't necessarily create culture. It's something that's sitting as words on a page. So it's either you acting through sort of a belief system and a sort of treat others the way you want to be treated mentality, but also bringing people along for the ride. So your close friends and cohorts in your class, in your workplace, comfortable, people that you feel comfortable with in the workplace that are sort of at a management level, and bringing them along for that ride. But there's then this collective group of people that are sort of having this equal and sort of equitable playing field that starts to sort of break down these silos that we're discussing. I also think that there is, in a lot of sort of inclusivity discussion, we revert back to silos very quickly because that's the way that conversations exist. We talk about women, we talk about LGBTQ, but then there's sort of a larger cultural conversation that needs to take place, or that should be taking place, about sort of a treatment and a value system. So
I realized that I stereotyped Mindy when I talked about you're working for a faith-based organization. So help me out here. So how do you break down stereotypes at work?
How do I break down
Yes.
stereotypes at work? For me, the most important thing is to arrive authentically in a space, and whatever that means. Sometimes that might perpetuate a stereotype. I would hope not, but I think that the importance is to find a place where all of you fits, and heave yourself into it, and the rest I think will follow. If you're able to do that in a way that is meaningful to the people around you, they'll walk with you, and that is what creates a culture, I think, in an organization. And that is what allows people to see people as they are, as we are, as individuals working collectively, collaboratively. That might be really idealistic, but that's where I'd start.
So, Kylie, I guess you're not out in the workforce now, but you had to break down some stereotypes here, right? You're quite an accomplished student. So, for the students on campus, what is your advice to them on breaking down, if they exist, right? Do they exist, and what do they need to do to break them down? They must be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think stereotypes definitely exist in our school and in every school, and in the workforce as well. I basically transitioned on the way out of school, so I don't have that much experience with it. But I would say that just being yourself in your classes, not really like not like centering, like, you know, like really like what Mindy was saying, like just like try and be like as authentic as you can in whatever space you're in, and hopefully you will like find friends, and like start to challenge the culture around you if it sucks, and I mean that'd be like my main tactic for challenging stereotypes right now is to just be me and not try to fit into any, or to challenge any if I actually enjoy fitting into them or whatever. So yeah, that'd be my take on stereotypes.
So what would be your advice to IIT on supporting equality?
Definitely well, I mean they could, I'm not sure exactly what has and has not been done yet. I know we had a couple talks with the school so far, supporting LGBT organizations like PRISM and the alumni affinity group that we're going to start, or that we are starting, and maybe making statements just to make sure that the school is open about the fact that it supports LGBT minorities and other minorities, and yeah, just supporting our organizations and just making us feel welcome on campus, as welcome as any other student would be.
So I want to go back to Anthony because this question of support comes up, right? So as a CEO, sometimes you want to support your employees, and part of the trap you feel is kind of that legal. What can I do? What can I not do? Because there's so much you can't do. So what's your advice to employers, how they can support equality in their workforce?
Well, what you can't do is take an adverse employment action. So in other words, negative, right? There's nothing that the law says the employers can't do to make a more diverse, more welcoming environment, to create a culture where diversity is not tolerated, but embraced and accepted and valued for the many benefits that it provides. And diversity does have real, tangible benefits for companies. Better decisions are made generally. I mean, there's lots of studies for that. So I think that there aren't legal barriers. It's really a barrier of will. Like, is there for lack of a better term, political will, right, to expend institutional capital, to embrace those types of policies and to make it known, that the company values their employees regardless of, who they are. And I think that's, certainly important. And I think the law, the law doesn't discourage that at all.
So I've done a lot of the structure talking to this point, but we have a little bit of time. So I guess with that, I'd like to open it up to the audience and see what questions you have. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm Gladys Hurst. I'm a career development coach here at IIT. As an ally, I always like to know what alumni and students see as useful when we are trying to help them in their career development, whether it's being either with direct strategies or different organizations they can reach out to. Of course, students aren't necessarily going to be come out. They just want to come in and have regular career advice, but maybe they do. What is some good recommendations that you would suggest that we, as allies at the university, could give students and alumni?
All right, who wants to take that question? Ryan or Mindy, go ahead.
I think one thing that I would say is that there are places and organizations and industries where identities do matter, and to really be aware of self enough to know what those are, and then be able to discern whether that's the best industry or the best organization.
I think on top of that too, there was earlier when we were discussing prior to the panel, this idea of networking. I mean, it's sort of this invaluable aspect to career development and personal development. And so whether it's, going to an event on campus and meeting someone new, there are these small steps that start to happen that build the confidence. I didn't start out as a freshman as confident as I am, that's for sure. I didn't come out to my parents until I graduated college, but I was myself on campus, and I had no problem with that. So it's sort of just these incremental ideas of development. So it's not just career development and going out and meeting architects or your associated professionals on their home turf. It's also sort of building that personal belief and sort of instilling that idea of presenting yourself in the way you wish to be presented and perceived.
Great question. Go ahead.
When you were undergraduates, would you have found it useful to have a mentor through the university or the Alumni Association? And I don't necessarily mean for your particular chosen intended industry, but someone to help you navigate what the issues would be about being out as you make the transition into the workforce.
I think yes. I think always having help helps. That's why it's help. It is helpful. I think the university has had different, at different points, thought, hey, let's get mentorship programs started. I think the university needs to actually see follow through with that. Throughout the years where I was here, it always started, and it kind of got there, but it never fully. And I'm sorry, I'm being critical of the university, but I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Yeah, and we're trying to do a service to the upcoming students and the students that are here and the university as a whole. I want to see this university succeed, and if that it means succeeding and being a little critical right now, that's what it will be. But yeah, I think it will be helpful. But it's not all on the university; it's also on the students. I think there should be the expectation that if you're that this is what you want, you're going to put in the work. It's IIT. We come here to put in the work. So just a reminder that having that added help will also take more work, but it will, at the end, help them.
Yeah, I think having mentors available would definitely be a very great service to students who want to do the work and want to push themselves and figure out what the best way is to move forward with their careers and schooling and such.
Kyle, did you feel like you had mentors available to you, or did you have to go search and look for them?
I feel like I had definitely there was the Career Services Center, and that was very helpful. I didn't really have a specific mentor during school, but that I didn't particularly look for one because I didn't know they were available. So
for all the students, you have mentors. You have people here who can help you. If it's not the people on this panel, they can get them to you. So you don't have to feel that way anymore. We'll fix that problem today. So, next question.
So we talked a lot about the employer's responsibility and that kind of conflict that can result between employee and employee relationships. But what about when you're representing your organization and you come across an individual who is not accepting of you come across conflicts? So whether it's you working in an industry where you're working with a vendor and they say something that's insensitive and you're operating in your capacity as a representative of the organization, I would love to hear different perspectives because I'm sure all of you could name multiple encounters that you've had. And as someone who used to work in the Chicago public school system, I encountered it all the time, and I would love to hear the perspective of people working in other industries because I think that that's something that it's a very real issue for people in the LGBT community. So I'd love to hear your responses to that.
Anybody want to? Well, I can. I do encounter that fairly regularly, and I think for me it's a constant weighing of the risk of how much I want to engage, how strongly I want to represent my own personal values versus the organization's values, and if in any way I would be. For me, I always I default to the representation of the organization. That is always my default, sometimes to a fault. And so there would be a tendency to dismiss my own values within that. And I think that's a constant battle. We need to be discerning and know what level of risk we're willing to take personally, professionally, and constantly being assessing safety within all of those circumstances. I don't know if that answers, but that's what I can speak to.
So I would say, I would add that as someone who is a chairman, I would extend the earlier comment to the employees as a whole. If we're doing business with someone that is going to disrespect our employees, we don't need to do business with them. There's other customers out there. And that really has to be the mindset of the corporation.
I was just going to ask, are there any external agencies or organizations that you would recommend that students can kind of plug into to get questions, answered, or resources?
I have a lot, actually. So, full disclosure, I'm very much involved with Equality Illinois, but Equality Illinois is, I think, a wonderful organization that does a lot of really great work, and in particular, hosts networking events for young professionals, and I think that's something that's open. They do it a couple times a year, something that I enjoy going to. But, I think that's one thing to look out for. Of course, Lambda Legal, right, and the ACLU both have offices in downtown Chicago, and they do a lot of really great work, great outreach, and particularly if you feel you're in a position that you're being discriminated against, that's always those are good resources to have. But they also do social events and networking events on occasion too, and I think those are, they're great opportunities to meet people outside of your field who are doing really awesome, wonderful things, who are, identify with the community and their allies. And, sometimes I think it's just really nice to have a network to rely on. You can find your mentors that way. You can find people who will support you and who will help you along the road. So, if I had to pick a couple, I think those three are like, exceptionally good organizations, good entities that can be practically useful, if you find yourself in a pickle, but they can also be useful in the sense of, right, providing those mentors and resources to get you, plugged into the community and networked in a way that, might be hard to do on your own.
And I have two more local organizations to talk about. There's a place called Trans Tech Social, which would be more for trans people, and also for people in technology fields. But they are a Chicago-based organization that is kind of getting up and running, and should provide mentors and such for people in that field with those identities. There's also the Center on Halstead, which is a organization building on Halstead Street in Boys Town in Chicago. And they host many different events at their venue. There was actually a job fair there not too long ago that is actually how I ended up getting my job offer. So having like LGBT specific like job fairs is a pretty nice thing that like you feel a little bit more welcome there. And there was a lot of companies that showed up, so it was a pretty good event. Yeah.
Excellent.
I'd just like to add one to that, and that is OSTEM, which stands for Out in STEM, Technology, Engineering, Math. So it's a national organization that also hosts career fairs and with other resources. So
That sounds amazing.
Please.
I also wanted to add there are a variety of Slacks available for helping people. I know there's an LGBTQ tech Slack, which you should be able to find just by Googling. And there's also a Slack that's called Chai Tech Diversity, which is really great for helping marginalized people in tech in Chicago.
Excellent.
I'm a straight male.
I don't. I see myself as someone who's trying to be honest, respectful, and loving. That's just who I try to be every day. If somebody learns from me, great. I think more of us just need to go out to the world and present ourselves honestly, with respect, not only to others but to ourselves. I think it goes kind of back to Mindy's point of she puts the organization first. So at what point is that 100% disrespecting yourself, right? It's about loving others and loving yourself as well. And I think that's how we can most honestly live our genuine lives. So to me, it isn't being a pioneer. It's just trying to live a peaceful, loving, fulfilling life.
To me, what? Okay. Yeah. So my academic work is like LGBT rights history from like the 1800s on. Gays existed in the 18th century, by the way. They were here. I think of pioneers as being the folks in, the 50s who were getting arrested from, because of their, they were, outed by others and booted from the federal government employment. And the, folks who were at Stonewall and people who were doing the hard work long before I got here. But I will say this, I'm from the South, from a small town, went to school at Washington and Lee, so not a liberal place, right? Home of Stonewall Jackson, just to emphasize how conservative it was. And, my classmates were awful to me. I had a professor who went on an anti-gay rant in class once, and I damn near quit law school, all because of it. If you ask my colleagues, my first, second semester 1L year, if I'd be a law professor, they'd been like, that guy's a loser. And they would never thought I'd be here. However, I had professors who, kind of slapped me around figuratively, and said, you gotta take the ill you see in the world and make good of it, and you need to use your intellect and your tools that we've given you in law school to change things. I would have quit law school but for that intervention. I would not be a law professor but for that intervention. And so, the pioneer question, it's for me a loaded question, but what is important about what you said is that, mentors and role models matter. I didn't have any openly LGBT law professors. I was the only openly gay person in my entire law school. And so, I didn't have other LGBT role models to look up to, but I had, allies who were there. And I think that that's important. I think it's incredibly important to make yourself known as an ally, or to make yourself known as a person who is a part of the community who can be looked up to by others. And so I think that's exceptionally important. And I'm glad that he's serving as a good role model to you. And I hope that we can all do that for each other.
Can I ask where you're from? Okay, so is you being an ally, being a pioneer for the people from where you're from?
I would say yes. Yes, there are not many people there. But we're taught to be more accepting. I tell my friends about we were told them it was surprised that school is normal. I tell them you study it, but don't be ignorant.
We thank you.
I'll tell you, I'm not gay, but I'm certain it's not a geographic thing. Okay, so so yes, I agree with your question. So next question. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just have a comment to make. I'm an alumni here from IIT, graduated in 1970. And when I first came to campus in 1968, and I arrived on campus, I knew no one, absolutely no one. Got off the train, got the bus down to this campus. And the very first person that I met helped me find where I was supposed to live, helped me find where the classes were. And I'm from Birmingham, Alabama in 1968. So I sort of running around. Every time I turned around, this person was there to help me. Not that I even asked, but it was just there to help me. And it turned out later on in life when I was working out in California for a very large company, I ran into this individual who had just retired as CEO of his own company. And it turned out that he was gay. And I didn't know, but then I didn't need to know because this person helped me. And I loved and respected that person for as long as I can remember because I was afraid, I didn't know what it was, I didn't know what I was supposed to do. And this person just helped me. So let me just go back to this whole thing about value. I spent 26 years in the Navy, United States Navy. My last command was in Pearl Harbor, about 2,000 people, men and women, and of all persuasions. So when they started talking about, this whole issue of what we're talking about here today in the military, now people look at this, Skipper, what's going on here? What are you talking about? What do you mean they can't be here? I need this guy or this woman. This person is a part of our team. So it was about the value they had created and the help and the care that they gave. Granted, there's idiots everywhere, but you have to deal with them. And you have to deal with them very quickly. People like lawyers. You don't hesitate. You just don't hesitate. You do it because they will continue to infect the whole organization and the environment. Yeah, you try to help folks, which I spent most of my life doing. If you reach a point where they can't recognize the value of human beings, then something has to change, and usually it should be that person who hasn't brought themselves to understand that people are people, and if they're adding value to your organization, you're going to protect them. You're going to protect them. So, I've been through a lot more hell than what I just explained to you, but it's all about the value and the core values that you have, that we all have, whether you're straight, whether you're gay, because if I see you needing help, I'm going to help you just like that guy did for me. I didn't even ask for it, but we have the values to know for understanding.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing. I think I want to thank the panel too. I want to kind of just real quick end it up. We got a few minutes. So as we're wrapping up here, just give us the 1 minute. If you were looking back at yourself now, earlier, and it doesn't have to be maybe going back to say your freshman year in college, and you're going to give yourself advice, what would it be? I guess Paula, we'll start with. Well, we started with you.
Then we should end with me then.
All right, Kylie, we'll start with. That was recent, so you should know. So we got time to think.
This is true. If I could go back to freshman year in college, that sounds about right. I'd probably just tell myself not to put off hard questions and not shove down weird feelings. for like the future, I tell myself to like examine my thoughts and feelings then, and figure out like what I really wanted, who I really thought I was. And I'd also like tell myself to just like give it my best shot and like keep doing my best at everything I was trying to do then, because that worked out pretty well in the end. So yeah.
Thank you.
Don't be afraid.
I think I would go back even farther to high school, which is probably where some more of my experience come from, but I think I would have told myself to be more witty, to sort of, through experiences, you learn how to react to things quicker. You learn sort of how to take a hat on and off, and when that sort of interaction happens, whether you say, okay, I'm taking this hat off now, I'm no longer representing my company, but I'm going to set you straight. I wish that I had done more of that.
So I was actually going to say the same thing. I love RuPaul's Drag Race because it's hilarious. And I think that part of the thing I've taken from that, and I've taken from my experience with the last few years, is, there's a lot of dignity in humor. And I think that the expression of humor is really an exceptionally important part of life. And I wish I had embraced it earlier. But if you look at my Twitter feed, I definitely embrace it now. So that's no problem with that.
Be honest with yourself and find your value and how you can show that to others.
So I guess with that, I want to thank Chanel, who pulled all this together and made this look really easy. So thank you. And thank IIT and especially, I'll tell the panel members, I do think you're a pioneer. I think it's taking the time to get up and share your experiences and give us your perspective really has a lasting impact. And so thank you all for being here. I know you're all busy. Thanks for taking the time.
This is part of a larger series of career and professional development talks. The next talk we have is posted here. You can go on the alumni.iit.edu website to register for this. If you want to see this talk, feel free to also go to that website, and the direct link is right here at the bottom. This will be posted in about a week. So thank you all for being here and part of this important conversation. As I've said many times, thank you guys so very much. And just as Brian said, you are pioneers because you're having this conversation, and there are a lot of people who wouldn't be courageous enough to do that. So thank you.
So you're gonna get more questions. I get to leave. Now I have to teach